Syndrome was a bit worried that nobody would turn up to my Imposter Syndrome party, but nice to see you all. I am absolutely delighted to be able to host, I think I can say this, can't I, Claire? The UK's expert on Imposter Syndrome, is that right?
Apparently so, it's what I get called, but too many years of specialising in it.
Fantastic, fantastic. So before we start, just a couple of ground rules, if it were. I'm going to be chucking loads of questions at Claire. I'm sure you guys will all have lots and lots of questions as well. We'll try and get to them at the end of the session, but if there's something relevant to what Claire or indeed I've said, pop it in the chat panel, and hopefully we'll be able to get to it and try and tie it in. Oh, a couple of people say they can't hear. Maybe try your settings. I'm not sure. I don't know, maybe log out and log back in again. I don't know. Mark has sound. Hi, Mark. Okay, so yes, so questions and answers, if you want to put those at the end, that'd be great, but we're quite happy to take them as we go on. Just to introduce me before we get onto the expert, my name is Phil Fraser. I am a business sounding board. I help business owners to not be lonely at the top. Just a spare pair of ears and a pair of eyes just to chat through those things that business owners really haven't got anybody else to talk to about. And just that constant feeling sometimes as a business owner that you're just making it up as you go along. And I think that will actually tie into some of the stuff we'll be covering today. So without further ado, I've mentioned Claire being the UK's expert on imposter syndrome. Claire, introduce yourself and tell us who you are. And I know you started as an engineer. Tell us how you got here.
So my original background was mechanical engineering. That was my master's degree, was Mech Eng and German. And I started off actually in diesel engine manufacture and design. And I was one of the first people in Europe to get trained in Six Sigma. So how to design in quality and make things so that they're easy to manufacture. But it also really matched my zero tolerance of fluff. I've always been somebody who, if somebody's making something complicated, I'm like, no, you just don't need these bits. Let's just take what works. So that's kind of how I'm wired. After about 10 years, you've brought out my Geordie. This is there we go. It's all us Northerners up on the call here. So after about 10 years, it was me too, and imposter syndrome. I jumped ship. I left engineering. There was some pretty me too things that happened in the factory, but the biggest thing was waking up every single night at 3 o'clock thinking, what if today is the day they realize I actually haven't got a clue what I'm doing, and I am a total fraud, and they should never have promoted me to this position. Now, you know, my appraisals were great, my degree was great, but I never believed I was good enough. I was always scared I'd be found out and everybody else had to act together, and I was the only one that felt that way. And so I actually went traveling for a year when I was about 30 in order to escape from this, because I couldn't, they were blocking my promotions. And it's when I was in an internet cafe, actually in Argentina, that I saw a job advert for a job where I thought, okay, I've kind of got no qualifications for this, but actually it feels like the perfect job. And it was, I became head of market research at Dyson. So I'd been running guerrilla market research in my engineering days, where we would go and interview customers to really understand their language, because what we were getting from the marketing team was filtered into marketing speak. Yeah. So I had this passion for being that communicator, that connector, and I was the link between the marketing team, the customers, and the engineering teams, which was an incredible role. That's when I studied NLP and psychology on top of my engineering. And I'd always been passionate about psychology since I was 14, and given a book on people watching by my aunt, who has a lot to answer for. It's why I do what I do now. After I'd done that for a few years, I realized I wasn't getting to make enough of a difference in somebody else's business. And I took the leap. Yeah, absolutely insane. Set up my own business, didn't have a client base, barely had a strategy. It was back in the days in the early 2000s where your business plan was something you reviewed with your bank manager rather than somebody that actually knew how to run a business. No offense to bank managers, but that's not what they do. Yeah, the idea of having a business mentor hadn't even occurred to me, but it still somehow worked. And you could say I've spent the last 18 years experimenting, learning from my mistakes, But I've also spent the last 18 years, initially by accident, specializing in helping business leaders to clear out the self-imposed glass ceilings that we didn't even realize imposter syndrome had put there.
Okay, nice long way around. Fantastic. So we get to the point where Claire is becoming the expert on imposter syndrome. Sort of how did you sort of get into that niche?
So my very first executive mentoring client, once I was running my own business, was really very successful. But it was that 3 a.m. self-talk coming up for them every single night. What if tomorrow is the day that they realize I'm not good enough, that they realize I don't belong? What if tomorrow is the day that they find me out? And this was causing them severe anxiety, mental health issues. It was affecting their marriage, their relationship with their children, their performance at work. And I got a reputation for being able to help the people when nothing else had worked. Okay, not really a reputation I wanted, because people would actually say, I'm sending you our problem child, you're their last resort before they get fired. But every single one, it was imposter syndrome, because the training they'd been sent on, the coaching they'd been given, the counseling they'd received had all been about mindset and confidence. And what was running was much deeper below the surface, this existential fear of they're going to find out I'm not good enough. And that means it's going to have this cascade of terrible consequences. And they were living in fear. So it was very common for the people I was working with to have been brilliant and then get promoted to that one level within weeks. They were turning into a micromanaging bully boss, a complete personality change. And I realized that the tools I'd learned, the psychology, the coaching, the counseling, the NLP stuff, I mean, I was a trainer at the highest level back then, it wasn't working. It was all sticky plasters, and it set me off on a mission to find out how to really get below the surface and deal with imposter syndrome at the identity level rather than just the coping strategies.
Okay, great stuff. So let's get right into the meat of it then. Okay, what is imposter syndrome?
So imposter syndrome is a term that was coined back in 1978 by Pauline Clance and Suzanne Eames. They called it the imposter phenomenon. And it is a phenomenon rather than a syndrome. It's not clinically diagnosable, but I don't know about you, I find phenomenon really hard to say. So I kind of don't care what it's called. What I care about is that people understand there's this thing and you're not alone and there's something you can do about it. So it is that secret fear of being found out. And what will be found out as can be different for each of us. It could be not good enough. It could be not knowing as much as you should. It could be that you don't belong. It could be that they made a mistake hiring you. And I talk about the imposter syndrome gap. So that is the gap between who you see yourself as being and who you think you need to be to achieve something. And quite often that gap feels like a bit of a ravine. It's a big drop. And we either go all the way around it, we self-sabotage, so we kind of don't have to do the thing, or we build what I call the bridge of coping strategies over the top, because sometimes in business, we don't have a choice. We actually need to get to the other side. And depending how good your coping strategies are, that bridge might feel quite firm, or it might feel like a rope bridge somewhere in the Amazon, and you don't want to look down. And this whole thing about push on through the fear, well, it can feel really scary walking across the bridge. Then somebody phones you and says, hey, Claire, could you do such and such? The gap widens because suddenly, oh my goodness, I now need to become that version of me. And the bridge isn't long enough anymore. The coping strategies aren't enough to allow us to push on through. And either the bridge tumbles or we totally self-sabotage, not returning the call in time or even volunteering somebody else that could do that thing that actually got us quite excited, or we suddenly have to put an enormous amount of energy into building a bigger, longer, stronger bridge. And the other side of imposter syndrome is about judging ourselves. So I talk about the secret fear of others judging us the way we're judging ourselves. We're not evaluating our performance. We're not saying, okay, I did that well, or I could learn from that. I could do that better. I could get training in such and such. We take that evaluation of our performance and we make it personal. So you might get feedback on a presentation, and instead of going, okay, yeah, they're right, I could have asked more questions at that point, we'd make it personal. It's, therefore, I am rubbish at presenting. We make it about who we are, not what we're doing. And then we feel like we've got to pretend, we've got to put on this mask, the armor, the act, the alter ego to show up as a different version of us, rather than clearing out what it is that means there's an imposter syndrome gap, so we can close the gap and just show up as all of who we really are and rock being us and not need that bridge of coping strategies anymore.
Okay, and it's that coping strategy situation that causes the problem, because the coping strategies aren't indeed fit for purpose. But before we get onto there, let's just go backwards a little bit. What isn't imposter syndrome? Because this is, there's a lot of rubbish talked about that. What isn't imposter syndrome?
So there's a difference between self-doubt and imposter syndrome. The two often get conflated because they both feel bad. Yeah. So self-doubt is about what we can and can't do. When I ran the 2019 imposter syndrome research study, we found there were two types of self-talk. There was the self-talk about, I can't do this, I don't know enough, I don't have those skills. What if they realize that I don't know as much as I should or as much as others do? This is all, you can hear it. It's all about what I can do, what I can't do, what I know, what I don't know. Then there was the deeper stuff of, I'm not good enough. They made a mistake hiring me. They're going to realize I am a fraud. So all of this I am stuff was the imposter syndrome. The self-doubt and the confidence was about what we could and couldn't do. And the brilliant thing about that is if someone's running self-doubt, then things like mindset and pep talk and general coaching and having an in-house mentor, for example, will all make a huge difference. Skill-specific training will really help them, because often what we're actually dealing with is a knowledge gap or a skills gap or an experience gap. All of that you can get support with, pretty straightforward. Imposter syndrome, you can give somebody that training and support to close the knowledge or the skills gap, but people will still be scared they'll be found out as not being good enough. So you need to work at that deeper level.
Right. Okay. So it's that mental, it's you self-judging rather than what your skill set is or isn't, or what you can and can't do. I just mentioned that as well, that there is a lot of rubbish out there about imposter syndrome. Let's debunk some of the rubbish. What's the biggest load of rubbish you've heard out there on imposter syndrome? I know we've only got an hour, but just the major ones.
So I want to preface anything I say here with, I know the vast majority of what people are writing and sharing out there about imposter syndrome is done from the heart with the best of intentions. But if that person is dealing with their own imposter syndrome gap and their own bridge of coping strategies, they've not yet learned how to close that gap. So the advice they're giving is about how to build a better bridge of coping strategies, not how to set yourself free. There are a lot of people giving self-doubt confidence advice to deal with imposter syndrome. And what this means is that you try it on the size and you've got these high hopes because it was a beautifully designed article or an interview or a podcast episode, and it doesn't work for you. And rather than thinking, is it because that person didn't have the techniques? We do the shame. Well, they said it worked and it didn't work for me. So they're right. I really am an awful person. Yeah. I'm not even good enough to make that technique work. So we judge ourselves even more. And it's one of the things we found in the research is actually classic coaching was making imposter syndrome worse because it raised awareness, but didn't give people the tools to do anything other than build a better bridge of coping strategies, yet more sticky plasters. Yeah. Or Band-Aids for our friends in the States over the pond. So it comes with the best of intentions, but it risks keeping us stuck. And it's one of the reasons why there are some really big imposter syndrome myths, like it's incurable, it's inevitable, it's a sign of growth and performance, because all that people have been consuming is advice on how to build the better bridge of coping strategies. That feels like a Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers, better bridge of coping strategies, rather than actually how to set themselves free from this. Because it requires a level of work that is not mainstream. Yeah, it's one of the reasons I wrote Ditching Imposter Syndrome. I was nagged by friends, by my mastermind group for about 4 years. It's, would you just write the book, Claire? And I'm like, no, kind of don't want to have to commit the process to paper.
That wasn't a bit of imposter syndrome in you not writing the book about imposter syndrome, was it?
It wasn't. And it was really interesting because this is my 8th book, Ditching Imposter Syndrome. One of the things that is really important to me when I'm writing a book is I want it to be what I call pajama ready. So it means somebody can be reading it in bed at the end of a day and it works for them. They don't have to sit there and get confused. It makes sense. And the processes are robust enough in a Six Sigma engineer that for at least 90% of people, they'll get the outcome that I'm hoping for if they simply follow the process. And getting the book to that level was a lot of work. Yeah, I did the whole research study to back it up, to create models that meant that the stuff that was intuitively in my head would be something concrete that people could understand without me needing to sit next to them saying, oh, that's what this bit means. Yeah. So it was a very deep breath, and the research study and the writing of the book actually took 2 years. It's the longest time I've spent writing a book, but it's been worth it because I needed to make sure. I also knew there was going to be a lot of contradicting received wisdom.
Okay.
The normal advice, and that I needed to make sure that was grounded in enough science and research that people could see why I was suggesting they do the opposite of what they'd previously been told.
Okay, you've mentioned a couple of things I want to touch on, so we're sort of going slightly off piece here. Tell us about the research, because I've heard about the research. Tell everybody about the research that you did.
So this was one of those stupid things, you know, where you sit with people you trust talking about your business over this was actually a coffee. And I remember saying, yeah, I need to find some decent recent research, particularly UK based. There'd been some studies in the States about imposter syndrome, because I want to quote the bejeebies out of it in the book. And I looked around and there wasn't any. There were plenty of small scale studies with groups of 20 people, but there was nothing other than sort of telephone surveys for groups of up to 2,000. So it's like, okay, I've got a research master's, I've been head of market research. I think we can do this. So we designed a research study that went out to 2,000 people. We did 200 depth interviews, pulled that together to really be able to get the models to understand the difference between imposter syndrome and self-doubt and why different techniques work for the two, to realize that it's a myth that it's just a woman thing. Yeah, the figures.
Just to stop you there, where did that come from?
So that myth, where did the myth come from? That it was a girl thing.
Yeah.
We found there are two things. One, the original research study by Clance and Eames in 1978 was only done on women. They did subsequent research that included men, but it didn't get as much publicity. So it sowed the seed that this is a girl thing. Then we found in the research study that female respondents were 20 times more likely than male respondents to talk about it and ask for help. So we're all there kind of going, I feel the shame, but I need help. Whereas the men were pushing on through the pain, feeling that fear, forcing themselves to take the action, which meant they were 5 times more likely than women to turn to alcohol, medication, or drugs to be able to cope with the anxiety it triggered. So it helped us to really get some data around this. I mean, the figures, people experiencing it daily or regularly in any given year, for female respondents, it was 52%, for male respondents, it was 49%. But they handle it very differently. It also allowed us to find that imposter syndrome is one of 3 hidden drivers behind the gender pay gap, which would not have been an obvious thought, but the way it was impacting women meant we were more likely to self-sabotage and to exhibit behaviors that meant we weren't as visible, we weren't as top of mind. We were, writing things off as a team effort, whereas the male respondents were more likely to be sitting there saying, yeah, I did that. Yeah. And the classic collaborative approach, there was a beautiful example that we had in 2 of the interviews. Male respondent had a photo, senior leader, photo taken with his team. He stood in the middle. Female respondent, similar level of seniority in an organization, photo with her team, she stood at the side. And this kind of summed it up. Is for her way of coping with imposter syndrome was to go, look at them. Don't see me, look at them. Aren't they great? The male respondent's response was, okay, I'm in this position, I have to own it, even if that's painful. So we learned so much about that. We learned models. This is what helped me to be able to take what I was doing intuitively, which was tailored to every client, and pull out the core process, the 5 key steps that somebody needs to go through to be able to set themselves free from this.
Okay, we'll because we're going in different tangents here. We'll come back onto the book later. So if anybody's got any questions about the book, we'll come on to that. The 5 key steps we'll touch on shortly. One of the myths you mentioned there was, it's more women than men that struggle with this. What other myths are out there about imposter syndrome?
So the big one is it's incurable because people have been trying the wrong things. Then also another big myth is that I need it to perform. I need it to give me the edge. And there's some fascinating research done by a Hungarian Canadian endocrinologist called Hans Selye. And he looked at different types of stress. He looked at what he coined the term eustress, EU, from the ancient Greek meaning good. So good stress versus distress. Now, the sympathetic nervous system, you've heard of the fight, flight, freeze response. That's what kicks off when we think of stress or a fear-based thought. But I realized over the years, I'd studied as a meditation teacher and a yoga teacher, that actually that stress response can be positive. So if you just turn off the stress, you can turn into a couch potato, like a sloth. There are days where I actually want to be a sloth. I just think it would be the most amazing thing to experience for a day. Yeah, just slow. So people are scared if they turn off this stress response, they'll get nothing done. And what Hans Selye found is actually this eustress is a good stress. It fires off the sympathetic nervous system, but in a way that's healthy, that gives us that anticipation and that excitement and that oomph. In the yoga world, it's called Shakti, that energy, that passion that makes us take actions that others hold back on. So I need it to perform is another big barrier. Another one is it's a sign of high performance and high potential. It's not, it's just there comes a point where the coping strategies don't work anymore. That bridge isn't wide enough to span the imposter syndrome gap, and so suddenly it becomes unignorable. And the issue with the myths is your unconscious mind won't let you make a change it believes is impossible. So if you're running a belief that, oh, I need imposter syndrome to perform, or I need it to keep me humble, or it's incurable, then your unconscious mind is going to go, whoa, Claire, there's this crazy lady on a webinar saying you can do something about this, but I don't think we're going to. I think we'll just humor her. So we really start by clearing out the myths. And they've come from people trying their best, it hasn't worked, and realizing they don't have a plan B. So they're just going to have to put up with it and cope with it.
Right. Okay. One of the things, again, going backwards, one of the things you mentioned is self-sabotage. And I want you to talk a little bit about that, because I've experienced that myself. I was up for, this is quite a few years ago, I was up for an international marketing director's job and got down to the last two and actually pulled out because I thought if I get the job, he's going to work out that I don't know what I'm doing. I'll blow my cover. So I actually pulled out of the race for the job. So that's my experience of quite extreme self-sabotage. Just talk us through self-sabotage, what it is, how it shows itself, and you know, we'll get on to how do you stop it.
So self-sabotage comes in many different forms. I remember back in my engineering career, I'd been headhunted to go to another company, and the chief engineer made up a job for me. Yeah, he wanted me to be his technical assistant, and I would review every idea before it went to him. So they were madly into patents, anything you could patent, and I would have to review every patent idea before he did, and only the ones that I thought had enough of a chance would get to him. And I completely freaked out. Yeah, I assumed he was an idiot and that he was only offering me the job because I was a girl, and that if I took that job, it would only take a matter of minutes before they realized that I knew nothing. They'd made a mistake hiring me. I'd managed to pull the wool over the eyes of every lecturer at university. So they gave me my degree, heaven forbid, yeah. And this was the moment where they would realize I was a total and utter fraud. But that wasn't what I was consciously thinking. The self-sabotage was, oh, but I've got a boyfriend back in England and this job would be based in Milan. And I was studying Italian at the time. So it really was my dream job. But, you know, and I probably should be back closer to my parents. And maybe this isn't, I gave myself the rational reasons to allow myself to turn down the opportunity of a lifetime. And I was so self-obsessed with this that I really thought the chief engineer, who knew me really well, was that thick, that he couldn't see what a fraud I was. That's how convinced I was that I was somehow damaged and broken. If I look at it from a business point of view, it's the classic somebody offering you an opportunity that's outside a comfort zone and just taking slightly too long to reply to the email. Or a journalist DMing you on Twitter saying, oh, could you give me a quote on such and such? And just pretending you've not seen it. Or saying, actually, I think you should talk to so-and-so. They'd be great for this, yeah? in business as well, it's about not valuing ourselves, not charging what our results are really worth, discounting without being asked, or not holding people to terms and boundaries, massive scope creep. And I see it all the time. People, oh, I'll just cap the fee at this because I think that's probably all you can afford. And we're second guessing their budget. We've got no data, but it's what it actually means is that's the most I'm comfortable charging. And it's all these ways we have of maybe not doing the work we really love, of doing the work that feels safe, not expressing all of who we really are, conforming, playing small, putting on that mask, that persona. I know one very famous entrepreneur who puts glasses on before every single meeting, and the glasses have blank lenses. But that is how they put on that, right, I'm confident, I'm now in this meeting. Which to me breaks my heart, because you've got to put on something in order to feel safe and secure. And my dream is that everybody can just show up as who they really are and be so comfortable in their own skin that it gives other people permission to feel the same way.
Fascinating, absolutely fascinating. So how do we, as people suffering from imposter syndrome, how do we identify what is and what isn't about imposter syndrome, particularly if we're building those, like you said, you're building rational reasons why it's not?
Absolutely. So one of the things that happens when I have a stepping up to lead program for industry leaders, and I had a student finish that early last year, and she picked up the phone and she just had an enormous promotion, and she'd used the work we'd done to negotiate a very nice pay rise. And she picked up the phone and went, "Claire, imposter syndrome's back." And I kind of went, oh, I shouldn't be, really shouldn't be. And then what she was describing in her language was, it's a totally new area for me. I don't know anything. I don't have the network yet. They're going to realize I don't know as much as everybody else in the team. I don't have these skills. I can't do this yet. So her entire language was telling me it was actually a skills gap. It was a knowledge gap. It was a network gap, not imposter syndrome. Her relief was quite tangible. Yeah, she did have a little bit of a cry, but that's easily fixable. We put a plan together, and within 3 months, she had that pretty much sorted. When it's imposter syndrome, there's this secret source. What if they find me out? I can't be visible because then they will find out blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Or they will realize that I am not good enough, clever enough, experienced enough. It's them realizing, feeling that you need to hide this perceived defect and feeling shame. Because this client was not feeling shame about the skills gap. She was pretty worried, had herself totally wound up. Oh my goodness, I worked with Claire for 3 months and it didn't work. Yeah. Until she realized that was just her skills and capabilities. And that was a very natural thing to happen when you move to a totally new department. Had she been saying, I'm scared they're going to realize they made a mistake choosing me, then that would have been, okay, red signal for imposter syndrome. The other big thing that you can tell in your body if it's running, there's something I call the flinch factor. If you think about something that's important to you that you've been putting off, and there's part of your body when you think about it goes, oof, yeah, kind of tenses or contracts, like, you're trying to become like a hedgehog, then that means there's something running below the surface that is going to cause you to self-sabotage, because at an unconscious level, your body is saying, I don't feel safe, Claire, you ain't doing that. Yeah. So these are some of the warning signs, those self-sabotage behaviors, and having a very honest conversation with yourself. Is this really imposter syndrome? Or is this actually a skills gap? Is this actually a knowledge gap? Because that we can put a plan in place to fix. And actually that we can put a plan in place to fix. But this one I can tackle this afternoon. Yeah. Whereas that one might take me a couple of weeks.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I to a degree, I had that throughout my business career was, shit, soon they're going to find out we're just making this up as we go along. And almost that was almost a driver to selling the business. Quick, if we sell it before they find out, we can run to the hills and they'll never know. It's not that's not self-sabotage, but that was that feeling of, shit, quick, take the money and run.
Absolutely. And what you're describing there is a very big decision made from one of the two primary emotions, made from fear rather than made from love.
Yeah.
So this is another way we can tell if we're self-sabotaging. Instead of the decisions being made from confidence, love, excitement, anticipation, they're made from fear, worry, anxiety, and avoiding being found out and caught. And I totally get it. 18 years in business. Yeah, I regularly feel like I'm winging it. But the difference is I know it's probably because there's a skills gap on strategy. Every time my business grows to the next level, I have to start hanging out with a different group of people who think different thoughts and have different strategic priorities and have walked a different path. This is all about that skills and knowledge gap rather than who am I to run that level of business? Because luckily I do walk my talk and I've done the work.
Okay, so let's say we've identified that you've said, right, okay, I can see that's imposter syndrome. How do we press pause?
So one of the key things, just pulling up something that's come up in the chat here actually is, I wouldn't consider a leader that promotes their team more than themselves necessarily suffering from imposter syndrome. And I'm glad that point's been made, because what you're looking for here is a collection of warning signs. There's no one warning sign. Yeah. So if you're sat there and you're thinking, actually, this probably is imposter syndrome, the 5 steps, the first one is actually looking at the myths. Is there anything that's going to hold me back from dealing with this? And the mentoring question there is, I can't ditch imposter syndrome because, is we start by dealing with the myths, because that then gives the unconscious mind permission to do something about this and for it to work. Then the press pause, there are a lot of techniques I teach, but one really useful one that you can use anytime, any place is asking yourself, what's real in this? So if we're stuck in what I call the mind story drama, where everything's kicking off and we're telling ourselves those stories, what is real in this? What are the actual facts? If I were to take a step outside of my body and look at me as somebody else, what would I say is actually true here? And how much of it is drama that's coming from inside of me, those worry thoughts, the what ifing, the catastrophizing? Because often this is enough to give us back our perspective and get us out of that stress. If you're in there in that moment and you realize you're about to self-sabotage, I've got my ABC process that I love to teach. So that is very, very simple. A is accept, B is breathe, and C is choose. So the ABC, you sit there and you, okay, that I'm accepting that was an imposter syndrome thought. Doesn't mean I'm saying I agree with it, but I'm just going to stop fighting with it. The breathing, the B, that is 60 seconds of mindful breathing, maybe with your hand on your belly, really becoming aware of those physical sensations. That resets the nervous system's fear response. Then the C is to choose a thought that brings you a sense of relief. So what you're doing with this process is you're rewiring the neural pathways in the brain so that you don't always go from trigger to catastrophe. You're helping to create neural pathways that will support you. You're also rewiring the body, though, to be able to reset that stress response, because the thoughts we think create biochemical reactions in the body that create our experience of emotions that then feed more thoughts. That's how the drama just really kicks off. By doing that breathe, you're pressing pause. You're being able to get grounded and calm. And then what you choose to think next, what you choose to do next will be very different because you've gone through neutral. So instead of plastering positive thinking on top of negative thinking, you're actually going through neutral and priming the body to be okay with accepting a thought or a choice that allows you to feel more confident.
Right. Okay. Now, I saw a comment that just pop up from, I think it was Jan, said, could you talk a little bit more about decisions based on fear versus love?
Absolutely.
Those two points you were talking about.
So it's said that there are 2 primary emotions that drive all other emotions. We have fear and we have love. So the love means I'm feeling okay. I'm allowing myself to be confident. I'm showing up as all of who I really am. The fear is I'm at risk. I'm in danger. I'm under threat. I'm scared. That automatically fires off those biochemical reactions in the body that fire off the adrenaline and the cortisol, everything to support that fight, flight, freeze response. Am I going to run? Am I going to go to war with this goal or this action? Am I going to pretend I just can't see it until it goes away? If we're making our decisions from that place of fear, then it actually impacts the blood flow in the brain. When we're getting ready to run from that saber-toothed tiger, because we're still wired like cave people, it diverts the blood flow from the prefrontal cortex that does your brilliant ideas to the primal part that only cares about survival. And information is processed by the primal part slightly faster than it is in the frontal cortex. So it means this bit starts making all the decisions. So that journalist phones you wanting a quote, and suddenly you're like heart racing, hands going clammy, your breathing moves to the upper chest. And you get on the phone and you're like, oh, and you can't think of anything even vaguely intelligent to say. And as soon as the phone goes down, you're like, why didn't I say that? Yeah. So if we're making our decisions from that place of fear, it's a very limited set of choices we have. It will be about the survival rather than creative brilliance and letting our genius shine. And we're holding ourselves back at a subconscious level without even realizing, which is why when I work with people on this, yeah, you need first aid, quick fixes. You need some sticky plasters to be able to keep going over the next few weeks. But we then do the stuff below the surface that was driving those fears. And it doesn't mean it's deep therapy. It's actually surprisingly easy. Look at what was the need that's being met by that fear-based choice. How do I clear and resolve and release that so I don't have to go there next time? I can go to the love space. Yeah, it doesn't mean I'm being I'm not munching lentils. I do munch lentils, but I'm not floating on my 29th chakra cuddling unicorns. Usually that's Friday nights. But it means that I'm in this empowered space more of the time. My internal dialogue is an encouraging cheerleader rather than Mr. Elsie, who was my teacher when I was 11, who managed to convince me how he was so scary. Yeah, we each have a voice in our heads. Yeah, I'm sure he's a lovely, lovely person, but Mr. Elsie lived with me in my head for very many years. I much prefer my inner cheerleader. If something comes up for me now that widens that gap because it changes who I think I need to be, instead of focusing on the bridge of coping strategies, which takes a lot of energy, I just ask myself, it's like a trigger. It's like, oh, okay, what do I need to let go of? Or what do I need to accept about myself to allow me to become that version of me? And then I just do it. And if I find myself doing the procrastination or the perfectionism or the people pleasing or the project paralysis, so I call those the 4 Ps of imposter syndrome, it's usually nowadays not because of imposter syndrome, it's because I'm exhausted. We've all been running on empty through this funny pandemic thing for 2 years. So now those behaviors say to me, oh, actually, I need to take some time off, rather than I'm self-sabotaging because I'm scared what will happen.
Right. Okay. So the first step to rewiring the brain is the ABC.
So the ABC is a brilliant way, both in the moment. Once you've practiced that technique, it can be there for you in the moment, but it also rewires the brain. There are other techniques I teach that are on my Soul Led Leaders podcast, for example. I think it's episode 6. It's a fantastic technique called micro wins. I call it connecting with your inner cheerleader. And it helps to rewire the filters in your brain that govern and influence what information we process consciously. Yeah, so like if you buy a car and it's a red car and suddenly everybody's been out spray painting their cars red just to annoy you, that is the bit of the brain that filters external information saying, Claire is so into red cars, she just bought one. Similarly, if we've spent years beating ourselves up, it'll say, oh, Claire is so into beating herself up. I need to make sure she spots that bit of information. And I know she's so not into cheerleadering herself, so we'll just ignore that bit. Yeah. So things like the micro wins process, that can help you to rewire that in as little as a couple of weeks. So you start spotting what you're doing well, not just beating yourself up. Right. So that would be the next stage there. So I have a whole course on this, my Inner Critic Bootcamp, which actually takes you through in 6 weeks exactly how to rewire the brain, but also how to rewire the body, because the body gets addicted to the adrenaline. It gives us a high, it gives us a rush, it gives us energy. It's how to clear that out in ways that are healthy. So you can then look at resetting toxic boundaries, reclaiming your personal power, and stepping up to the next level on the difference that you're here to make.
Okay, so you've just mentioned it. Tell us about the boot camp, Claire. Go on.
Yeah, okay.
Free promotion. Go on, off you go.
So the Inner Critic Bootcamp, it normally runs in-house for corporate clients, but once a year I have a public round. where there are only 25 places, because you actually get to work with me. We've got small group calls, we've got a really interactive discussion group inside each lesson, and it takes you through 6 key steps. So the first one is being able to press pause on the stress response, which is an absolutely amazing thing to do, and that in itself can be life-changing. Then step 2 is all about rewiring your brain to tame your inner critic, to start turning it into a cheerleader with the techniques that you can use for that neuroplasticity. And they take like a minute, 2 minutes. They're incredible. Step 3 is rewiring the body, because if the body is primed in fear and stress, it's going to support fear-based, worry-based self-talk. So you need to rewire the body as well. And this is what most people miss out when they're looking at positive thinking. Then once you're kind of a lot more chilled and calm and happy, and you're being much more supportive on your self-talk, step 4, that's all about resetting those toxic boundaries, looking at what we're consuming that could be bringing us down, looking at how we're spending our energy and our attention, looking at energy vampires, those people who you have a conversation with them and they feel great afterwards, and you're like, I'm just hiding under the table for the rest of the day. It's how to be able to say no without causing offense, and how to step up and say yes and feel excited. And then steps 5 and 6 is all about becoming that next version of you and consciously creating your future. Because when we create our dreams based on the imposter syndrome gap, our dreams are very different to when we've closed that gap, once we've cleared out that inner beating ourselves up, once we have got a body that's supporting us with positive thinking. So we even look at things like the foods we consume and the impact that that can have on our mood. Once you've allowed yourself to become this version of you, then what you want to consciously create in your future becomes even bigger. It will have more impact, and the actions you take will be different. And the course is also designed to repeat. So the first time you do it, you do all the newbie stuff. You do one habit each week. That's it, one thing for a few minutes. And then you can come back a few months later and resit. And the materials are designed to work at the deeper level, to take you that next leap, and you do the next layer of actions. And then the third layer is actually where you get to be ninja, and you get my deepest insider secrets, so that you are out there absolutely rocking this stuff and people are asking you what your secret is.
Okay, and how do people book onto that? Because I'm sure everybody now wants to get onto this course straight away.
So it's as I say, it runs once a year as a public available course. So you can, for a business, you can get me in if you've got at least 30 people. Once a year, there are 25 places. Starts on the 25th of April. You go to clarejosa.com/inner critic bootcamp. Okay,
fantastic. And actually, we just had a question here from Rachel, who says she's got a client who she thinks got imposter syndrome. And what advice could you give them? Are there any resources, courses for you to provide? There you go, Rachel. There's the answer before you even ask the question.
Absolutely. So the Inner Critic Bootcamp is that brilliant one for laying firm foundations. For a lot of people, that's actually all they need. If you've got somebody and they're in a senior position and that bridge of coping strategies has just fallen into the ravine, I have my Stepping Up to Lead program, which comes with additional mentoring, and it takes the next kind of 8 steps beyond what we do with the boot camp. So that's probably a small percentage of people that need that one. But I also run training to become a certified imposter syndrome first aider, which can be really useful to teach people the techniques from the Inner Critic Bootcamp on a one-to-one basis. And I also, as of January, we certified the first ever worldwide round of certified imposter syndrome mentors, people to go out there and actually teach that deeper stuff that I've spent the last 18 years developing. And it's taken us 4 years to get that program designed and accredited. And so to have our first grads come through, that was a real happy cry moment.
Fantastic. And Jan has just asked, when does certification take place?
So the certification, if you want to become a mentor, the next round of that also starts 25th of April. You know, the spot's the end of the Easter school holidays. And that runs for a full year. So everything I do is virtual because students are coming from all over the world, but we do the live stuff via Zoom. So that starts April, and the main training from that runs from April to September. And then I give you 6 months of full support to get your case studies done, because that's a really important part. I don't want anybody sort of, going from theory to actual practice can be, we resist it a bit. Yeah. So I want to make sure that everybody's fully supported on that, and that you've got a lovely small community. There's only ever 8 places actually on the mentor training, because I want you to really get to know each other, be able to support each other. I want to know you well, because that way it's a personal development journey for you. So the mentor training, you actually start by doing my Stepping Up to Lead course for yourself to clear out your stuff. Then you learn how to support others with it. So it's a post-grad training, so it's only for experienced coaches and therapists. And it's certified at ILM level 7, so the Institute of Leadership and Management's highest level coaching certification.
Okay, fantastic. Right, we've gone sort of all over the place here. Let's just pull it back. We've got a couple of questions. I've got one from Richard and one from Rachel. I'll come back to those. You talked about the 5 key steps. Just remind us very quickly what those 5 key steps are.
So step 1 is clear out the myths. Okay. Step 2 is taming the inner critic. Step 3 is clearing out your hidden blocks and fears. Step 4 is actually going that bit deeper, looking at what were the unmet needs that were driving this. And then step 5 is consciously creating your future. So there's work we do there. And also I build in step 4 and 5, a lot of work when I'm working with people on how to influence, how to have more impact, how to get your message across without feeling like you've got to shout. Because you've got to that level on clearing out your stuff, it means that you can be truly authentic, rather than having to put on this persona. So it helps you to communicate with your teams. It helps you to communicate with your clients. It helps you to communicate with the wider world. So those are the 5 steps: clear out the myths, tame your inner critic, deal with the limiting beliefs, the fears, the excuses, everything that's been driving it, get to that nitty-gritty underneath the secondary gain, what was really causing this behavior, and then that consciously creating your future is step 5.
Okay, great. I hope everybody's written all those down, because I'm not going to ask you it again, because you've had 2 chances now, everybody, to hear that. You've talked previously about a fatal flaw that means positive thinking falls flat. What is that fatal flaw?
So for my British readers and clients, I call it the Imposter Syndrome pantomime. And since publishing Ditching Imposter Syndrome, I've realized that not every country grew up with pantomimes the way we did. So, so your pantomime is something that happens every Christmas in the UK. And you often have it's a fairy tale usually, and you have people cross-dressing for the humor of it. It's a very old tradition with us that comes from the Comédie des Arts in France and Italy back in the 1700s. But there's always got to be this kind of slapstick, a bit of a farce about it. And one of the things you often get is people standing there saying, I think I'm completely safe. And suddenly the villain's behind them and the audience is screaming, no, you're not. The villain's behind you. And this is what happens when we try to use positive thinking to heal imposter syndrome, is you've got part of you going, I'm not good enough. Oh, yes, you are. Oh, no, I'm not. Oh, yes, you are. Oh, no, I'm not. Oh, yes, you are. And then you can hear the audience screaming, he's behind you. Yeah. So we have this pantomime going on in our heads. And the backfire effect means that the bit of you that wants to protect you, saying, no, I'm not good enough, or I can't do this, or they'll find me out, will always win, because the brain is wired to protect us for our self-preservation. Plus, when we've been thinking those stress-based, fear-based thoughts, the body is primed with all those biochemical stress responses to think and support more negative thoughts. If we then just try to paper over the top with positive thinking, we create an enormous internal conflict, both cognitively and physically. So this is why the ABC process takes you through B. It takes you through neutral. So those of us in the UK and Europe, we're used to gear changing. Might be that hand, depending where you are. Yeah, we know we can't go from first gear to second gear without going through neutral, or it could get very expensive. So those who are used to driving automatics, we have to go through neutral before we can change gear. We can't just go backwards and forwards on our cars. It's the same with the brain and the body. If you're stuck in negative thinking and you try to flip to positive without going through neutral, it's not going to work. If you do that 60 seconds of breathing to reset the nervous system, then you can change gear into the positive. And the key, so the ninja tip on this, is when you start thinking those positive thoughts, is allow yourself to feel them as well, because that ramps up the speed at which it creates new neural pathways. This neuroplasticity, it's like how you learn to ride a bike or speak a language or drive a car or cook lasagna. Yeah. If you've ever learned anything in your life, then you have neuroplasticity running in your brain. And the fact you've learned how to use Zoom to join us on this session today says to me, you're a pro at neuroplasticity. Going through neutral and then adding in the positive emotion means that the neuroplasticity becomes even more effective. So when a trigger thought comes up, you've no longer got the autopilot that goes into catastrophe. Instead, you've trained your body to go, oh, okay, that one was interesting. Do I want to feed that story? Or am I going to feed this one instead?
Okay, fantastic, fantastic. I'm conscious that we did say this was going to be an hour, but we're probably going to overrun. So please hang in there, everybody. Let's talk about the book, because I can see it behind you. Talk about the book, Ditching Imposter Syndrome.
So,
go on, show us it. Go on, don't be an imposter. Show us the book.
Oh, lovely. I'm so thrilled. We've actually just had to do another print run, which, if anybody on the call with me here is an author, you know that's like a really, really big deal. When I spoke to my distributor, I've just had a corporate order 200 copies for International Women's Day. And they're like, we don't have 200. I'm like, oh, okay, you want more money. So that's very exciting. So ditching imposter syndrome. The reason I chose ditching is I don't want people to cope with it. I don't want people to handle it. I don't want people to be able to cope despite it. I want you to be setting yourself free. But also the kind of person that resonates with my work is going to be ditching, not kind of curing. It's quite an action-based person that works well with me. And this is, doing this from a book means you've got to be a self-starter. You've actually got to apply the exercises. So the book is a blend of the research, the theory, case studies, examples, and stories, but also practical exercises, the exact type of thing that I do with my mentoring clients. So if you follow the process through, it will help you to be able to clear out imposter syndrome. And when you publish a book, it's really like standing in front of the headmaster's office. Gosh, it sounds like I was traumatized at school, doesn't it? Mr. Elsie, now the headmaster. It's like standing in front of the headmaster's office because you've been called to the head and you don't know whether you're about to get a pew or a, yeah. So you send this book out there like a baby into the world, and you sit there and you hope and pray the first reviews are going to be good. Even though you've had your beta testers and everything, you're just like, okay, this is actually going into a bigger sphere now. And it was amazing because those first people who tried this stuff on the sites, who were completely new to my work, so they didn't know my weird terminology or anything, they were telling me how much it had changed their lives. Yeah, I met one of them, I remember, at a conference about 2 months later, and he just swept me off my feet. I didn't even know who he was. It was a bit freaky at first. But he just, I can't believe a book could do that. Now, what he said is it was what was missing for him on a lot of the other books that he was doing that were telling him how to visualize, how to manifest, how to create his dream business, how to grow his following. He hadn't done the inside work that would make all of those strategies feel safe. And so it removed the self-sabotaging. So that's my big prayer with imposter syndrome, is not everybody can find the investment to work with me on one of my programs. So for the price of a pizza, if you're a self-starter and it comes with a resource vault with extra stuff as well, you can get out there and still make huge progress. You just need to actually implement it. So it's going from that information to implementation, putting it into practice.
And how do we buy it?
So Amazon is the easiest place, or you can order it certainly in the UK from all bookstores. And I do believe it's also available in a lot of other third countries to order in. And it's available as a hardback. There's a print on demand paperback for international sales. And there's also Kindle and EPUB versions.
Fantastic. I keep thinking about writing a book, but obviously my imposter syndrome goes, oh my God, who on earth is going to read a book you write?
We need to deal with this, Phil, because you've certainly got the experience and the background and the ability to communicate. That means actually whatever book you wrote would be really a joy to read. And the way I look at it is, if ever I sit there going, oh, it's a book, it feels scary. It's like, really, it is literally black and white, putting my thoughts out to the world. I always flip that around to say, look at the books I've loved the most in my life. How would I feel if that author had been too scared to write it? I'd be really peed off. Yeah. So I've always just flipped it around and made it about the reader and got myself out of the way. Because it's the only way we get written. It's the only way we can do it. And having the support team as well. I have a fantastic editor who was very upset by one of the reviews. Could have done with some editing. She's like, do you know how much work we put in? There's always going to be somebody for whom whatever we write is not going to resonate. But this is why I'm very deliberate in the book title, in any blurb that goes with it, to make sure that people can see whether it's a great fit for them. And if it's not, that's fantastic. There's other stuff that they can do. But hey, if you're sitting there thinking, wow, this actually sounds pretty cool, brilliant, then you're going to love the book. Okay, so it's called Ditching Imposter Syndrome, available from all good outlets and some bad Absolutely.
ones. Okay, right, we've got some questions coming through. So if anybody else has got any more questions, please bang them through and we'll ask Claire. So just going back slightly, Rachel Atkins says, love the idea of a first aider. Where do we find info on that?
Okay, very easy. clarejosa.com/first aider. Okay,
nice one. Patty Smith says, can we affirm that imposter syndrome is part of a narrative?
Okay, Patty, I'm going to ask you to give me a bit more detail on what you're looking for there, rather than me assuming, because I'm guessing from what you're saying is that it comes from self-talk. So if you can just explain that a bit more while I answer some of the other questions, I can make sure I answer the question you're actually asking rather than me assuming. Is that okay?
Okay, so Richard Gadd says, after establishing that self-doubt and imposter syndrome are different, what advice would you give to those experiencing irregular self-doubt? Okay. Not sure what the difference is between regular self-doubt or irregular. I suppose it means now and again.
Yeah, absolutely. And all of this stuff is context dependent as well. So for example, somebody might be running enormous imposter syndrome in the context of pitching a client, but be completely fine doing the supermarket shop. Yeah. So it is irregular. It comes and goes. And sometimes it can be so context specific that you're absolutely fine unless Fred is in the room. Yeah. So it really is nuanced. So if somebody's running irregular, intermittent self-doubt, I would be suggesting you start with taming the inner critic, because the self-doubt is a self-talk thing. So you've got the ABC, there are other strategies I teach, but something that can build up that muscle is actually that micro wins process, which is in the Soul-Led Leaders podcast, episode 6. So that is about connecting with your inner cheerleader. You write down 3 things you've done well each day, making them very specific about you, and you allow yourself to really feel them. And you do it even on bad days. So you then have this book you can literally go through and go, yeah, but I did this and I did this and I did this. I do have these skills. So that's the one side. The other side is, if self-doubt comes up, is asking yourself honestly, is there a skills knowledge gap running here that I need to close? And putting an action plan in place. And that feeds into one of the next questions. Is it more common with somebody who's newly promoted? Definitely. You know, when we're promoted, it changes who we see ourselves as being. Anything that changes our sense of identity and self will open and widen the imposter syndrome gap, meaning that bridge is then hovering, supported by just thin air. So the coping strategies that used to work suddenly become less likely to work, and you have the choice of either putting that energy into desperately put more planks on the bridge of coping strategies, or to run. And I have lost track of how many people come to work with me because they just got promoted, realized the bridge of coping strategies wasn't enough, and could feel that they were about to jump ship and either go to a lower skilled job or go and set up as a consultant because they think that's going to fix it. Yeah. So definitely promotion can be a real trigger. Sometimes that is a skills knowledge network gap. Sometimes it means dormant imposter syndrome that you are coping with will come up to bite you on the bottom.
Okay, great, thank you. Oh, Steve McDermott says, I'll read your book, Phil. So thank you, Steve. And actually,
I'm going to read your book. I want to read your book.
Okay, that's two. But can I just give Steve McDermott's book? He's got lots of books, Steve. He's brilliant. His latest book is called How to Be a Complete and Utter Fuck Up. Okay, so I would recommend you go and read that. I've not read it yet, but I will do very shortly. So How to Be a Complete and Utter Fuck Up by Steve McDermott is brilliant.
Fantastic. That's brilliant.
Ian Strachan says, traditional strategies for imposter syndrome treat it like a limiting belief, actively seeking evidence to counter the limiting belief. Does that work?
No.
There you go, Ian. No.
So I'm going to give you a little more detail on that, because actually this also answers Patty's question, because she's clarified now. It's an NLP, she's an NLP master practitioner, and she's looking at the pattern interrupting for curing and clearing fears and phobias. So all of this works at a symptomatic level. But if we look at limiting beliefs, something created them. So if all we clear is the belief, then actually the stuff under the surface that meant that belief was needed to keep us safe, that limiting belief, like a dandelion, will just grow up from the root and find a different paving crack to come between. So you can create a lot of symptomatic relief by dealing with fears, phobias, limiting beliefs. And that's actually step 3 in my 5-step process, is we do deal with those. But then we go that next level deeper and we say, what was the unmet need that meant that belief was the most sensible, logical decision in that moment? So we clear the stuff that's deeper, and we clear it both in the cognitive brain and in the body and the emotional habits. And for those of you that like engineer approved woo-woo, we clear it in the energy body as well. So I go a bit woo on this for people who are happy to, because it's often the missing link. So yes, the fears, the phobias, the limiting beliefs, it's brilliant, but it's not going deep enough to clear imposter syndrome, because you want to release and resolve whatever it was. And I don't mean the event, I mean the need, the emotion, the fear that meant that limiting belief was born.
Okay, fantastic. Mark Walsh said, Mark was one of the first people I spoke to about writing a book, and he said to me, write the book. And he's just written it again. He says, write the book. So I might have to write a book. Okay, Jan Weiser said, why does it happen upon promotion? I think you've covered that. And Jan has also put, can you give an example of these underlying limiting beliefs? Are they big tragedies?
Okay, brilliant. So these underlying limiting beliefs, one of the things that I do that's quite unusual is I do not look for a trigger event when I'm working with clients on this. So I'm not actually interested about whether or not you had a Mr. Elsie in your life. Yeah. What I'm interested in is, what was the emotion that then triggered those coping strategies and that shutdown? And that's what we clear. Now, the reason I'm not interested in the causal event or what that tragedy might have been is because often it's not actually what really triggered it. If I take an example from when I was 15, I had a fantastic English teacher and I wanted to be a writer. And I did an essay that I thought was brilliant. And she wrote back 2 things on the bottom of this essay. Firstly, I got a B, which for me as a perfectionist was a fail. And she wrote one word, contrived. I didn't even know what it meant. I had to look it up. I mean, like this insult and criticism, I had to go to an old-fashioned dictionary that weighed about 20 house bricks and look up how I was being told my essay was bad. In that moment, I shut down. I can't write a story. Wasn't a conscious thing, but I decided she was right, I was wrong, and I stopped hoping and dreaming. My kids have grown up without me ever telling them a made-up story. And it took until 5 years ago, I was like, but I really want to be an author. I mean, I'd published 5 books by then, but because I hadn't written a novel, I didn't think I was a real writer. So I did my work. I got myself on a creative writing course. I did the process I teach and sat there and said, I don't feel any different. That was a complete waste of time. 4 days later, I had drafted the plotline of 3 novels, and 2 of them have now been published.
Amazing.
So I could say that the tragedy or the limiting belief that made me shut down that novel writing for so many years was the beloved Mrs. Foe, but it wasn't, because she couldn't have pressed that button if it hadn't been building over the years. So that was just the causal event that I remember. If all I clear is that, then there's a lot of unraveling to do. That dandelion still has roots. So by clearing at the emotional level, at that secondary gain level, how am I keeping myself safe with this? Then you don't actually need the causal event. If there was a trauma, I've got tools that can help people to deal with it. I specialize in complex PTSD, but you don't need to look for the causal event, because I could have blamed Mrs. Foe, but actually it wasn't her, because she couldn't have pressed that button had I not already had that button in place to be pressed. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. I hope Steve McDermott's listening. Who has the next question?
So I see we've got one from Patty. I could do it in combination with it. Sorry, yeah, I could do it in combination with hypnosis. It could work then. So back in my NLP trainer days, I was also a hypnotherapy master practitioner. One of the reasons I stopped using hypnotherapy was because I found that clients were giving me then responsibility for the fixing. Yeah, they would come in, lie there, relax, sit up, and their life was changed. And whilst that was brilliant, I found that for this deeper stuff, they actually did need to go through a cognitive process of understanding how it had been released for them to then take back responsibility. So I do actually have imposter syndrome first aiders who combine this work with hypnotherapy, but there's stuff that I didn't have access to in hypnotherapy tools that allows us to go deeper now. So it is definitely great for clearing out the stuff someone's ready to release, but it doesn't always cognitively for them get to that real root of, okay, that's the fear that's been driving this behavior. So it depends on the client.
Okay. Claire, you like this one. Richard Gadd says, your eye contact with the camera is as good as I've ever seen. Well done.
Thank you. So I'm going to let you in on a secret on that one. So firstly, that was NLP trainers training back in 2003. It's like boot camp. They break you. It really is. It was so hard. Secondly, I've edited over 10,000 hours of video work. It must be by now. You know, if we all say we hate ourselves on camera, and I am so aware of using peripheral vision. So I'm totally aware of Phil's facial expressions. I'm keeping an eye on how the chat's moving. But the main thing is I want to imagine that we're actually sitting here having a cup of tea. Yeah. And yeah, I learned that staring straight at that little light is the way to do it.
Right, I'm doing it now. I can't see that now. Okay, so goodness me, we've gone on a long time here. Just lots of people saying thank you. Who has the final question? Got time for one last question? Oh, Steve McDermott's already ordered your book. There you go.
Oh, thank you.
Fantastic, Steve. Well done. You've got to order Steve's book now. Reciprocal. He's probably cost more than yours, so you're probably out of pocket. Okay. Do we have time for one last question? Nobody else is asking any more questions. You must have covered absolutely everything, Claire. So,
absolutely, yeah. Totally overwhelmed now, confused and overloaded, but hopefully inspired.
Okay. Reminders of where we can find you and where we can buy the book and where we can get on the course.
So the main place for me is clarejosa.com. I have a whole website on imposter syndrome called ditchingimpostersyndrome.com. The place I love to hang out with people is LinkedIn or Instagram. They're my two favorite places. And can I just pass on one last message, Phil? Would that be okay?
Of course you can.
So to you watching here today, I'm going to implore you, if this has resonated with you, I actually don't care if you work with me or not, okay? What I care about is you do something. You take action. You let go of coping and having to put up with this, because the future you will do the biggest happy dance you can imagine, even if you just take this much action. So anything that you do as a result of what we've all discussed between us today, what we've co-created, anything you do will make a positive difference every single day for the rest of your life. So please go and be an action taker. Start the journey to set yourself free from this and watch that magic happen.
A brilliant way to end the session. I'm sure everybody will join me in saying it's absolutely brilliant. Thank you very, very much indeed. Another person's ordered your book. Goodness me. I wish I was on commission on this. Goodbye to everybody. Thanks ever so much indeed.
Thank you so much.
Really, really enjoyed it. Claire, thank you so, so much. And people might not know, but Claire's had COVID and this is the only thing she's doing this week. So we all should be very, very grateful.
I cancelled everything apart from you guys.
Fantastic. Cheers.
Thank you. Thank you so
Bye.
much.